We're going to move on to a pretty stark topic. There are profound implications of the war in Ukraine for the future of transatlantic cooperation, and in particular for Central and Eastern Europe. Some are immediate consequences, and some are long-term. Let us explore now the challenges and the opportunities with Ian Brzezinski and Réka Szemerkényi. Mr. Brzezinski is soon with us live online, but unfortunately, Ambassador couldn't make it online today with us because he's moving on somewhere, Moldavia or in the Ukraine, and of course, he does not have good enough reception to join us today. So let me welcome to the stage for the online discussion with Ian Brzezinski, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., our moderator, a heart and soul of this conference, a transatlantic bridge for conservatives, as I just learned now, a former ambassador of Hungary to the United States, Réka Szemerkényi.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate these wonderful words. You shouldn't say that, but I'm extremely appreciative of this possibility of having a very dear friend online. Ian Brzezinski has been on previous events discussing with the Equilibrium Institute experts, and we're very honored to have you here from Washington now. So thank you, Ian, for this great opportunity. And of course, this is a big topic. So this is something that is really in the forefront of everybody's discussion and thinking in this room, and certainly all around the world. Because what we see is really a world that is more fractured today than ever before since 1990. So much so that I think we can call this period of the post-1990 kind of peace, cooperation kind of hopes as an end. This 30 years is over. It seems that the war in Russia, as well as the conflict in the Middle East, is not just another glitch in the system, but it's more systemic. It shows a deeper conflict inside and deeper confrontation that is behind this. So we're having a very tough decade probably ahead of us. The floor is yours on this very cheerful introduction. Ian. Oh, we cannot hear you. Wait. One more time.
There we are.
Yes,
thank you, Réka.
it does.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
I actually won an award at the Atlantic Council for constantly not turning my mic on, so I can keep that practice. But Réka, thank you for including me on this best agenda. And as your colleague noted, I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. I'm calling in from outside of Washington, D.C. And let me just say, I'm so proud to see the Council among this conference's partner organizations. I really wish I could be there in person. Few things better than being in Budapest.
Next time.
Early fall.
Next time, yes, next time.
Next time. Well, as you noted, unfortunately, our focus of this discussion is a grave one. We're convening as Russia's brutal and unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine has been underway for over 2.5 years. The humanitarian consequences of this conflict have been massive, unseen in Europe since World War II. Estimates by the US government say that the Russian and Ukrainian combatants killed or wounded now exceed over 500,000. Thousands of Ukrainian citizens, including children, have been killed. Millions of Ukrainian citizens have been displaced, forced from their homes, if not their nation, by this Russian attack. Unspeakable atrocities have been committed by Russian forces, including the mass kidnapping of children, Ukrainian children, rapes, torture, summary executions, and what amounts to literally ethnic cleansing in Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. Russia's strategy has emphasized not only full-scale attack against Ukraine's military, but also an unrelenting attack against Ukrainian civil society. This has included missile, air, drone, and artillery strikes against apartment complexes, shopping malls, even schools and hospitals. That and more are the humanitarian consequences of Russian President Putin's ambitions. This evening, you're in the evening, let me review with you what what I see as a strategic stake in this conflict, how it is related to a growing risk of global conflagration, and what we need as a transatlantic community, what we need to do to bring this war to a just, quick end that maximizes peace and stability in Europe. This is a war whose implications are not just regional. They are global in their impact, particularly if Russia is allowed to win. First and most obviously, Ukraine's sovereignty and independence is at stake. But Putin's attack is more than just a seizure of territory. Putin aims to erase and rewrite the history and identity of the Ukrainian people. Why else is he sending thousands of seized Ukrainian children to so-called patriotic camps? What we are witnessing is an atrocity on a scale not seen since the days of Hitler and Stalin. And we should not forget that. The preservation of the rules-based international order is at stake. Now, I know that is an arcane phrase, but the internationally accepted structures and laws, principles of sovereignty, that emerged after World War II to minimize the recurrence of war and enhance stability have been the basis of unprecedented peace, freedom, and prosperity around the globe. If allowed to succeed, Putin will bring us back to a world defined by spheres of influence, back to a world where disputes are resolved through brute force. Third, this war is setting dangerous new precedents in the use of nuclear weapons. Nuclear coercion has been a key element of Putin's strategy to invade Ukraine. And it has been exercised with effect, limiting the support the transatlantic community has provided Ukraine. Think about it. The mantra of no boots on the ground. The hesitancy with which we have provided Ukraine tanks, long-range strike capacities, aircraft, missile defense, and the restrictions our governments have placed on their use against legitimate military targets in Russia. What lessons are our adversaries taking from this brandishing of nuclear weapons? They see that these weapons of mass destruction can be used to effectively deter others from meddling in their hegemonic ambitions. Think of China's planning regarding Taiwan. There are other proliferation ramifications as well. Those who don't have nuclear weapons but fear such coercion are more likely to seek nuclear weapons. And that includes constructive countries, our allies. Think of the debate underway in Korea today, South Korea today. When one rewards nuclear coercion, one increases the proclivity for the use of nuclear coercion. We're seeing that in Ukraine. And I would argue that increased exercise of nuclear coercion increases the likelihood of such weapons being exercised. This is a real concern I have when we speak of defending Ukraine as long as it takes, rather than defending Ukraine decisively. A fourth factor at stake is Russia's evolution as a democracy and as an international actor. Zbigniew Brzezinski, my father, who was a Sovietologist, he emphasized that Russia cannot be a democracy if it continues to be an empire. If Putin's aggression is not fully reversed, Russia's prospects of evolving into a democracy and a constructive international actor, well, that will be severely diminished. And that is a recipe for continued long-term confrontation, if not conflict, with Russia. Finally, NATO's credibility is at stake. What NATO does and does not do in support of Ukraine will shape the confidence in its member states and the respect it garners among its adversaries. Think about the imbalance of power defined this conflict today. NATO nations have a combined GDP of over $54 trillion. $54 trillion. That's more than 25 times Russia's GDP, which most estimate to be less than $2 trillion. NATO spends nearly $1.5 trillion on defense. Well, that's more than 10 times Russia's estimated defense budget. With all that is at stake, and with that kind of advantage, one has to ask, how is it that, why is it that the alliance is not enabling Ukraine to crush this invasion? Réka, You ask, what does this all mean for Central and Eastern Europe? It would be supremely naive to assume that Russian victory in this war would end conflict at Ukraine's borders, which are Hungary's borders. If Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not defeated, we will face an emboldened Moscow, one that is more determined to re-extend its hegemonic reach across Central and Eastern Europe. Putin's been clear about his ambitions. Moscow will pursue those ambitions, leveraging its nuclear power, perhaps even more aggressively than we have seen to date. And it will do so with the conclusion that the alliance no longer has a unity and will that has been the foundation of its effectiveness over the last 75 years. History has shown time and time again that victory does not satiate a hegemon's territorial appetite. It only amplifies its imperial ambitions and its confidence in achieving them. But as I said, the ramifications of this war go well beyond Europe. Russia's intent to resuborn Ukraine, I would argue, began the day the Soviet Union collapsed, and I can tell you a story about that if you wish. But more importantly, its overt military invasion began in 2014. And that was a war driven by Putin's regional ambitions. It was a phase of the war largely shaped by regional realities and geopolitics. Today, this invasion is different in a very significant way. It is no longer a regional European conflict. It has become part of an intentional, collaborative effort to undermine the international rules-based order and the power of the democratic community of nations. It has become the operational focal point of a global contest between democracy and autocracy. And driving that effort is what some have labeled as an axis of upheaval, consisting of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is actively fueled by China, Iran, and North Korea, who together provide Moscow economic, industrial, and military sustenance. Just this week, we learned that Iran has sent Russia over 200 short-range ballistic missiles. The growing and tragic violence in the Middle East is driven by Iran, which receives the support of Russia, China, and North Korea. In the Indo-Pacific, China's aggression against its smaller neighbors is intensifying. China, of course, benefits from Iranian and Russian oil and a security partnership with Russia. Let's not forget that just last October, a Chinese ship steaming from a Russian port on the Baltic Sea dropped its immense anchor and dragged it across the seabed for 6 to 10 kilometers to tear up Finnish and Estonian telecom cables and an energy pipeline. And this week, Russia and China are undertaking joint naval exercises in the Indo-Pacific as Russia continues its brutal invasion of Ukraine. These three connected crises, high-intensity war in the heart of Europe, violence across the Middle East, and escalating Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific, are pushing the world closer and closer to a global conflagration whose violence could match and exceed that of the previous world wars. If we are to prevent such an escalation, the most urgent priority is to defeat the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That would give pause to hegemons in the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific and elsewhere. They would no longer conclude that those who believe in a world of law and democracy have lost the capacity and will to defend their interests and principles. With its economic, military, diplomatic, and ideological advantages, the transatlantic community and its partners have the capacity to enable Ukraine to defeat this Russian invasion quickly, decisively, and on Ukraine's terms. The elements of such a strategy are straightforward. They just need to be exercised with determination. First element are objectives. Allied leaders must unambiguously endorse and embrace Ukraine's war objectives. That is total territorial reconstitution back to the nation's 1991 borders. Anything short of that is a disillusioning signal to Ukraine. Anything short of that encourages Putin to sustain his invasion. The second element is, of course, to provide Ukraine the weapons it so urgently needs, when it needs them, at the rate and volume it needs them, and without restrictions on their use against legitimate military targets in Russia. You know the list: fighter aircraft, long-range fires, mine-clearing equipment, tanks, air defense. The third element of the strategy are truly comprehensive and effective sanctions that must be imposed on Russia with immediacy. And the West has yet to do that. This year, the IMF is projecting that Russia's GDP will grow 3.2%. That underscores the inadequacy of the West sanctions regime. By the way, that's the same rate that the Russian economy grew last year. Severe sanctions alone may not stop Putin's invasion, but their imposition and their enforcement will weaken Russia's war machine. They will undermine public support for Putin's war in Russia, and they will serve as a positive reflection of the alliance's resolve. Fourth, NATO allies must energetically engage the Russian people about the brutal realities of this war. Today, the transatlantic community does not have what one can call an intensive offensive information campaign directed toward the Russian government, key Russian stakeholders, and the Russian public. As Russia and its allies intensify their disinformation campaigns against the West, it is time to go beyond largely defensive measures in this realm. It's high time to weaponize the power of truth against Putin and his invasion of Ukraine. The fifth key element of a strategy to win is to put Ukraine onto a clear path to NATO membership. NATO membership for Ukraine is not only necessary to secure a post-war peace, whatever that might be, it is also an essential element to an effective win strategy in this war. Ukraine's membership in NATO and the security guarantee that comes with it is the only way to convince Putin that Ukraine is irreversibly locked into the transatlantic community and its structures and is no longer vulnerable to Putin's subordination. Let me close by just emphasizing Putin's invasion of Ukraine is an inflection point for the NATO alliance and the transatlantic community. What we do and what we don't do to support Ukraine will reverberate across all the transatlantic community's endeavors, be it defending the democracies of Central and Eastern Europe, guarding the High North, or even reinforcing transatlantic interests in the Indo-Pacific. The success or failure of Ukraine will impact perceptions of the NATO alliance, again, in the eyes of our friends, our members, but also in the eyes of our adversaries in and well beyond Europe. Success or failure in this conflict will reverberate globally. It will determine whether our world returns to a path of peace, stability, freedom, and prosperity, or allow itself to fall into a future far more volatile, anarchic, if not violent. That is what is at stake in Ukraine, and that is why we must take decisive action in support of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's so much in what you have said to give us food for thought. I would like to ask if our audience wants to send maybe one or two questions before we adjourn on Slido. You could download it on your phones with the QR code that we showed before, and please send the questions here on the tablet. And as I'm waiting for this, I would like to ask questions to start the short Q&A, if you give us 5 more minutes. I think, I really hear it a lot in, especially in Hungary, but in this part of the world, that the big question is, how to handle Russia after the war, and why it is important is that the question of the outcome of the war between, the aggression of Ukraine, as you said, is going to impact on our transatlantic values and on our transatlantic international structures of cooperation, but at the same time, it's unimaginable to think of Russia collapsing. What do you think will be the way Russia should be managed or handled after some kind of a military settlement?
I think that should be determined by how Russia conducts itself. If there is an end to this war that's just, I think it's more likely that we're going to see kind of a change in the politics of Russia. It's not certain, but it's certainly more likely than if Russia wins this war. It's certainly more likely if Russia isn't able to continue this war. But if after this war we have a just peace, We have Ukraine's territorial reconstitution. And Russia decides to take a more constructive path in its engagement with the West as an international actor, well, then I think we should move to foster that by, re-engaging it gradually, cautiously, but substantively. The ball, really, quote unquote, isn't in our court. It will really be in Russia's court. And if it decides to go in a constructive way, we can explore with it how to have that constructive relationship. We can think about how to reinforce that direction. If Russia decides to kind of dig in and take a North Korea approach to the end of this war, well, then we're going to have to be prepared to take, the measures necessary to secure our interests in what will be a long-term confrontation with a recalcitrant Russia. The ball is in Russia's court, not ours.
Thank you. The tough one. We have two more questions here, which are fascinating almost as a follow-up to what you have just been saying. Can you imagine Russia as a European ally in the future against China? And can the EU or the US use a democratic Russia as a partner against an emerging Chinese superpower in the future?
Yeah. I've always been a bit surprised by the relationship between Russia and China. They use a lot of lofty language, call it strategic, enduring, never-ending, and such. To me, it's a fundamentally imbalanced relationship and an inherently unstable one. It's an inherently unstable one because there's nothing more unstable than a partnership between two authoritarians, two dictators. I mean, think of Nazi Germany and Stalin's Russia. How long did that relationship last? Relationships between authoritarian states are transactional, they're opportunistic, and they're inherently fragile. The imbalance, of course, is obvious to everyone. We're talking about a country that's got a $17, $18 trillion GDP. Russia's is a minion in comparison. One is technologically vibrant, the other less so. It does good technology and all, but it's nowhere near as technologically dynamic as China. China's on the step up. Russia is a struggling, declining superpower. It's an imbalanced relationship. And I kind of refer Russia in this relationship as kind of China's guinea pig. I mean, think about it. Here it is attacking basically a close friend, partner of NATO, of the transatlantic community, testing out Russian equipment, maybe even some Chinese equipment, seeing how effective US, Western, European equipment operates on the battlefield, getting a first-eye view of what the tactics are, how they're evolving, all at huge cost to Russia. It's sucking down Western weapons inventories. It's putting stress on Western economies. And by the way, the icing on the cake, it's weakening Russia. So it's even less capable to challenge China. It's an imbalanced relationship. So I think at some point they're going to go their own separate ways. I would argue they're more likely to go their separate ways if Russia's decisively defeated, because China will have even less respect for Russia. So it's an unstable relationship, and that's for whether Russia will want to kind of turn away from China and join the West. That's possible, and probably a better move for Russia in terms of its own self-interest, because otherwise it's going to be risk being dominated by China. I think there are a lot of Russians who are very uncomfortable with this relationship. They don't like being second fiddle to China.
Totally. And if I can recall your father and my professors, very insightful remarks back in the early 90s, he back then, speaking of Brzezinski, back then said that Russia has a choice to make between being a partner as a mid-power to the European and transatlantic cooperation or a satellite of China. Absolutely. We have quick questions to you. Do you see any of the elements of the comprehensive strategy that you talked about, which brings us back, to the previous panel that we have had on the U.S. elections and the impact of the U.S. elections for security and transatlantic cooperation? Do you see any of the elements of the comprehensive strategy you outlined pursued by the next U.S. administration, whether DJT or Harris?
Well, regarding Trump, I mean, we saw clearly what his plans are when he participated in that debate a couple of days ago. I mean, his intent is to stop the war at all costs, regardless of what the security implications are. He's willing to push Ukraine into massive territorial concessions. That's a reward. That's a win for Russia. That's a recipe for long-term confrontation with Russia. That's a recipe for encouraging Russia to push on. I think it would be incredibly disillusioning, not only just to Ukraine, but to across Central Europe, if not most West European states. It would be seen as an abandonment of Ukraine and an abandonment of an important security priority for the West, which should be to defeat this war. To me, it's incredibly dangerous. You know, I would even, when I look at Trump and I listen to his writings and watch his advisors, I'm more worried about that than him taking a direct action against Ukraine, against NATO. I think he'll lay back on NATO, watch the relationship evolve a while. But what he does on Ukraine could be actually devastating to the alliance. It will raise real questions about America's commitment to European security. And then as for Vice President Harris, and if she becomes elected, you know, continuity seems to be kind of the primary phrase word people use to describe the relationship between what will be her policies in the Biden administration. I think she'll continue to support Ukraine. I'm not convinced that she will undertake the steps necessary to increase our support to Ukraine, necessary to enable Ukraine to win decisively. There has been no indication that she has a very different estimation of the escalation calculus in this conflict. So continuity, I don't see a dramatic shift one way or the other under the administration. And of course, we'll have to see, you know, who her advisors are, who emerges as key cabinet leads. I think that will give us a little bit more insight into what her policies will bring and how they'll be different from the Biden administration's.
Thank you. You touched upon this a little bit, but one more question brings you back shortly for this, because Trump has been speaking about ending the war in Ukraine and making a deal. And what do you think, which kind of a deal he's having in mind?
Well, we don't know. You know, one thing you've got to be careful about with President Trump, he's assiduously avoided being specific. He talks about great outcomes, but he doesn't describe how he's going to get there. So the impression that we have, based on what he's said, what he hasn't said, and some of the writings of key advisors are, it sounds like what he wants to go in and say to both Russia and Ukraine, ceasefire now. I haven't heard him say he'll go to Russia and say, withdraw from Ukrainian territories. He's emphasized, I want to stop the killing, which is a nice humanitarian impulse, but is a de facto reward, massive territorial reward to Russia. So it looks like he'll come in and say, Ukraine, hey, if you don't stop this war, we're going to end our assistance to you. And to Putin, he'll probably go in and say, hey, if you don't stop this war, we'll increase our assistance to Ukraine. And Putin will go, okay, I'll go for a ceasefire. Why not? They'll enable me to reconstitute my forces more. It'll enable me to dig in more. And then a few months or a year, I'll start up again. That's kind of what I'm worried about as an outcome of what we understand of Trump's approach to this conflict.
Thank you so much. We have lots of questions, but one last one maybe, because this brings us to Hungary. How do you perceive Prime Minister Orbán's peace missions in July? What signal does this send to Russia and others?
They're completely unhelpful. I mean, when he pulls moves like that, he's signaling that there's disunity in the alliance, in NATO. What Putin loves about Orbán is his big hope to fragment consensus, because it only takes one country to fragment consensus in NATO and prevent active decision. That's a role that Prime Minister Orbán has been playing in this conflict.
Oh, on this note, I would like to thank you so much for joining our event. I very much appreciate thinking together and being able to maintain this brainstorming, common thinking overseas. I mean, real transatlantic connection with you now sitting in Washington. I really appreciate your comments, and I would like to ask our audience to join me in thanking you for joining us and accepting our invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.